Welcome to What is Black podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Jacqueline Duget, and again, we have another great show. So let's get started with the conversation. I'd like to welcome our special guest to this episode of What is Black podcast, Dr. Jalan Burton. She's a pediatrician and founder of Healthy Home Pediatrics, and even more importantly, she's also a mom. So welcome, Dr. Jalan.
Hi, thank you so much for having me. Thank you.
So I'm gonna go. I know you asked. We talked earlier. I'm gonna call you Dr. J. So Dr. J, if you can give us a brief bio, because you're such a dynamic pediatrician, and give us a little bit of information about your practice.
Yeah, thank you so much. So yes, I'm a pediatrician and a public health advocate. I have next year it'll be 15 years of experience in working in kids' health. I live in Washington, D.C., and I do house calls for pediatric patients in D.C., Maryland, and Virginia. I have a background in primary care, pediatrics, working with children with special needs, youth development, and public health. I went to medical school here at GW, did the master's degree in public health from Columbia, and I went to the University of Virginia, Wahoo, to my fellow Wahoos out there. And after practicing medicine for years in academic medicine and in private practice, I really knew that I needed to practice in a way that it could be more holistic and more personalized and less rushed. And so I founded Healthy Home Pediatrics to solve a lot of the problems that parents in my community were experiencing. I want every family to have one really highly skilled and committed doctor that their children can see. I want when people call their doctor for them to be able to get that doctor, not a triage person, not a nurse, not the front desk. When my patients have appointments, I wanted them to really be not rushed. And I really just didn't believe in the 15-minute appointments that most folks get, even I get when taking my kids to the doctor, so that I could really give my patients a really personalized plan. And so, I wanted to be available when my patients needed me the same day or the next day when they were sick. And so, Healthy Home Pediatrics is built on the backs, is built on the experiences of our foremothers and forefathers. There's really a larger movement in medicine to recenter the doctor-patient relationship so that we can provide exceptional care, outstanding primary care to children and young adults, and in particular in their home.
So you mentioned, and I think this was one reason why I definitely wanted to speak with you, this different take on practicing pediatrics. So you have what's called a house call-based pediatric practice. And I was wondering if you could share with us a little bit more about what that entails. And is it new, or have doctors been doing house calls for a while?
Yeah, so house calls to me just made sense. They're very well suited for busy families, for families with newborns, families with multiple children, working parents, families with children with special or complex medical needs, you name it. One of the fundamental tenets, Dr. Jackie, of medicine is for us to do good and to not do harm. And then with my background in public health, a lot of what I was taught in school was to really meet people where they are. And so, when you really look at healthcare delivery, house calls are really the epitome of that. So, children spend most of their time at home and at school. And so I really think that working with families in their home is going to be an integral part of revolutionizing healthcare. For me, in particular, the insight that I am able to obtain from a 1-hour house call versus what I can get in my 15-minute office visit is pretty staggering. Thankfully, when I was in residency at the University of North Carolina, I got to do some of my rotations, shadowing nurses and physicians who were doing newborn visits. They were doing medically complex children care in their home. And then also I served as a medical director for one of the DC Medicaid programs, and I worked with care managers. And so when I was establishing my practice, I knew that I had to do house calls so that I could really provide very personalized plans to address the specific needs of each patient and each family. And also, nobody really wants to take their sick kid across town, fight for parking, and I didn't want to pay anybody thousands of dollars for rent either, for at least as it goes in D.C. And as you mentioned, have doctors been doing house calls? Yes. It's a historical issue. Throughout time, doctors doctors and midwives have gone directly to where patients are in their homes and in their communities. And in particular, I know, kind of gearing things also towards this conversation about equity and race, I think it's also a health equity issue. Wealthy people in this country have always had access to doctors who visit their homes and doctors who can spend as much time as they need. I mean, you and I know Beyonce is not taking her kids to the doctor, and even the White House has doctors who do house calls. So for many doctors, including myself, we are really working diligently to make sure that we can provide this highest quality level of services to working people like us. And so through my practice, that is what I offer, really high-quality, personalized care in the comfort of their home at a very affordable monthly price.
Which I think is great. We both share multiple things. We can check our boxes. We're moms, we're pediatricians, and we've also worked in public health. And when my day job is public health, I think a lot of the basis and background of public health has been on home visiting, more so nursing home visiting.
Yeah.
So, but I think it's great that, that sort of evidence-based practice, we call evidence-based practice, things that have been proven to make a difference in terms of health outcomes, to then translate it into, this specialty that we don't typically think of as doing house calls because of the way our medical system is set up. I think it's great.
Yeah, thank you.
Now, you also, in your introduction, there was definitely an impetus for you to make a difference in terms of the health outcomes in your community as one of the inspirations for developing the house call business and the house call pediatric practice. So I was wondering again if you could share a little bit more about what health issues you hope or you're hoping to address by this type of practice.
Yeah. So I did a lot of research prior to opening the practice, talking with colleagues. And so in short, it was really about sustainability for me, about recentering the doctor-patient relationship and really providing convenient, holistic services to busy families. So it was a really complex decision for me. I knew that I could do so much more with my skills than the hospital and clinic administrators that I worked for would allow. And, I know that they had serious time and financial constraints that were imposed on them by health insurance companies and oversight agencies. But I also knew that my patients deserved more. And I knew that these kind of traditional practices and these office-based tools were just not working when we looked at the health outcomes of our patients and our communities. It's just, it's a pretty dismal picture. And then lastly, I also looked around at my colleagues and the picture was dismal as well. And, I'm sure Dr. Jackie, but physician burnout is at an epidemic level and physician suicide is on the rise. And so I really had to step back and I knew I owed it to myself and to my family and to my patients to do something different. I was inspired by mentors that I had who had opened similar practices. I was even inspired by mentors who were struggling in private practice and traditional private practices, and they were just, sharing their lessons learned. I was also inspired by the Mocha Moms. I know you've done a previous episode with the Mocha Moms, but, as a support group for mothers of color, I really found Mocha Moms very helpful for my own career and my own family life because they really pushed I wouldn't say pushed entrepreneurship, but they shared entrepreneurship as a way that many mothers kind of found harmony in their lives. Work-life balance is a topic that folks really talk about a lot, but I am embracing more of work-life harmony, so trying to be authentic at work, trying to be authentic at home. And I knew that I just honestly, looking around and doing research, I didn't seem like I would be able to find that working environment in a traditional practice. And so, physicians such as myself and my mentors have chosen concierge or what they call direct primary care as a way to really recenter the doctor-patient relationship, to push out unnecessary burdens that were really imposed by insurance companies, hospital systems, clinic administrators, to keep their doors open, practices, and employ their staff. Practices often have to schedule 30, 40 visits a day so that their doctors can make it to 20 patients per day. And for doctors such as myself, it just wasn't sustainable. I knew that it wasn't practicing the best medicine we can offer. And oftentimes, my experience is not unique. Folks are saying it doesn't feel safe. It doesn't feel ethical to do it this way. We dedicate our lives to working with people, not to rush people, not to push medicines, but to really work with people and walk them through the different phases of life. And so in doing my research to try to figure out a model that was sustainable and that was centered on the patient, I really started reaching out to other colleagues in the area. And through that, I was able to find folks who have been doing concierge medicine or direct primary care for 2 years, 10 years, 30 years. I thankfully was also given the opportunity with the American Academy of Pediatrics. I received about 2.5 year fellowship with them, and so I had a lot of dedicated time and mentorship and really looking at practice management, physician wellness, burnout prevention. And so when I was selecting what type of model to practice under, concierge or direct primary care seemed to be one that was really sustainable, really allowed physicians to do really great work on a small scale, but then also to use my public health skills to develop, health programs just for my small little community of patients. So my whole philosophy is really about providing exceptional care to families in a way that's heartwarming and in a way that's sustainable for me.
Oh, that sounds awesome. So I'd love to hear more about some of the programs you're developing or that you have developed for your patients to sort of address that health equity and to try to address improving health outcomes for your patients.
Yeah, so I have been in a lot of discussions. So the beautiful part about being a small practice and having a small, intimate practice is that I can almost develop programs for my groups of patients. So I have, for example, a group of newborns in my practice, and the mothers and the fathers and I are developing programs just so we can start getting the babies out regularly, exposing them to different educational experiences. I have a group of patients with asthma and allergies, and I'm really able to target things based upon what I see in the community. So my son has asthma, my husband has asthma, I have pretty bad allergies. So as soon as, allergy season hits, I start seeing the pollen, I am able to quickly send out an email, quickly send out a text message to all of my patients, letting them know, hey, the air quality today is pretty low. Everybody make sure you don't forget to do your controller medicine. And, please call me, email me, text me if you need me. And I also offer telemedicine opportunities so we can do telemedicine check-ins regularly before the season begins to get everybody on a plan, to review asthma action plans. So that is one of the wonderful things about having kind of what folks call a micro practice is you're able to develop very intimate programs for the folks that you serve because you don't have thousands of patients that are assigned to you that you may not know. Like I know all of my patients. I know their stories. I know their history. I know their community. Even though I practice in DC, Maryland, and Virginia, it's all very close. It's a very small, what we call like the DMV within the Beltway. It's very small. And so I'm really able to really highlight and target what my patients need because I live, 25 minutes away from everyone. So it's been a really wonderful experience. I feel like a small town doctor in a big city. So it's been great.
That sounds cool. So Dr. J, I wanted to just circle back. You mentioned telemedicine. And I don't know if a lot of the listeners are familiar with telemedicine. So I was just wondering if you could share briefly what that entails. Or what? Of course.
So telemedicine is an emerging form of medicine where doctors are able to just be available, not just by like in person for visits, but also using video or text or phone when folks need you. So a common telemedicine visit would be like a child that I know very well, because I do not do telemedicine for folks that I don't know. I think that there are not a lot of laws around the country yet kind of establishing what the doctor-patient relationship needs to be. But my standard of care, my best practice is that I see all of my patients at least twice a year. So that's every 6 months for a full, detailed physical, even for older kids. And so I have recently seen them within the last 6 months, and it is only to review, if a kid that I regularly see ends up having a rash and the mom just doesn't know, what this rash is. Can this kid get back to school? It's easier for me to do a video than it is for them to send me a picture, because often they don't give me the correct angles. I can't kind of see if the kid is looking toxic. And for those not in medicine, it's toxic is does this kid look sick? Does this kid look tired? Does this kid look dehydrated? And so I can do a quick, secure video appointment just to look at the rash, and then I can determine, do I need to see this child tomorrow? Do I need to come see this child today? Do I need to see this child tomorrow? Or is just this a regular rash that we're going to keep an eye on? And again, because my practice is intentionally small, I can do very detailed follow-up. So I can schedule follow-up the next morning to see what the rash looks like. And I can schedule it after, in 2 days to see what the rash looks like again, to see how the kid is doing. So telemedicine is using video, text, phone to provide additional levels of care to patients when a kind of in-person visit is not necessarily needed. I know there has been some controversy I've been seeing on a lot of the physician listservs about doctors who don't already have relationships with patients doing telemedicine, and there have been some poor outcomes with folks getting antibiotics more than they need, or just getting a level of service that they don't need. But that is not my model. My model is these are established patients in my practice that I know well, and I offer telemedicine as an additional as an additional service to them. That's included in service. Actually, it's not an additional service; it's included in what I do.
Oh, that sounds great. I think it sounds like you have a wide variety of options for patients to access you, ask questions, and to do follow-ups, which I think is a lot of. I understand a lot of practices don't have or have not started telemedicine, so it's not as widespread as it could be. Like you said, it's an emerging technology. But I think that's still a great opportunity.
Mm-hmm. I think that's a very real, again, the constraint when you're in a traditional practice is you're, being paid by the insurance companies. And so it's very difficult for practices that are, dealing with very thin margins for being able to keep their doors open to provide services that insurance companies don't reimburse for. I don't know any insurance companies that currently reimburse for telemedicine services, but I know it works. I know my patients like it. I know that it works for me as a provider. And so, part of the reason why a lot of direct primary care and concierge practices are able to offer this is because we're not traditional systems. We're not traditional practices. So, the insurance companies just haven't quite caught up with that. I think that they will eventually, but a lot of us say our patients' lives are too important for us to wait, for the insurance companies to catch up. So we're just going to do it, kind of separate outside of the traditional system.
So again, thank you for sharing details about that service. And as if patients, people who are listening to the podcast, I think it's also if they have, they have their own provider, they can also possibly check and see if their provider offers that service or their insurance company offers that service.
Definitely.
Because I think it's always good to kind of know what you don't know, right, and look at other options. Like you said, especially with an established patient that you work with, there may be a time when, let's say they can't make it to you, or you can't make it to them for some reason, right? Just because of scheduling. And then if you're able to do that, via the phone, the computer, having a check-in visit, you can still, make sure that, that patient or that family is doing well, or if they have any questions, they can also kind of be reassured by speaking with you and seeing you.
Definitely. And that is, it's usually reassurance. Parents usually know what's going on with their kids, and they just want somebody else to just say, yeah, it's okay. The baby's going to be okay. But I think that's maybe some people sometimes don't understand. And I think they do, but they don't. Because even as pediatricians, right? I think for me, when I had my kids were younger, and even sometimes now, right? If they have issues, I have to take them because they're still young enough that they can see the pediatrician. One is aging out pretty soon, but even the youngest one, I may know the diagnosis, or my husband might tell me, "Oh, Jackie, you know what that is,"
why do you have to take them to the doctor? I'm like, well, like you said, I think it is reassurance, and it's good to know that, okay, yeah, you're smart too, and you saw the same thing, and I'm not just panicking because I'm a mom first, and unfortunately,
definitely,
I can go from zero to panic pretty quickly.
Yep, I agree.
So, and doing research about you, Dr. J, it was definitely apparent that your role as a mom and your commitment to working within the community were strong drivers and passions for you for your practice. And I was wondering if you could share a little bit about how being a mom has influenced. I think you touched on it a little bit, but how that's really influenced your practice, and then also the important role for you to be in your community and not just to be part of the community holistically, like you said, and not just just live in your community.
Yeah, definitely. Being a Black mother in pediatrics has definitely influenced my practice. I think especially making sure that I'm using my knowledge and my skills to advocate for my diverse patient populations has been extremely, extremely important to me. Building healthy kids is what I do, every single day. I use my skills to make sure that all of us can provide really safe and healthy environments for children. Most of the time we get out of kids' way, they will figure it out. They will be healthy. They will do, what they need to do. And so part of what my work has always focused on is making sure the home environment was safe and healthy, that there weren't harmful chemicals, no strong smells, making sure we limit stress, toxic stress, and then also intergenerational stress, which we're seeing a lot of kind of evidence of. I've always used my platform as a mom, as a Black mom, as a human being, to really advocate for all of us. So being involved in the community is something that I just do. Even last year when I was pregnant with my second son, on my due date, actually, I testified at the DC Appropriations Committee where they were discussing like the DC public school budgets. And my testimony in particular really focused on having access to safe playgrounds and safe play space for children, and then also making sure that kids had access to fresh water. My son's school had these broken and outdated water fountains, and I'm like, how are kids supposed to run and play if they don't have access to healthy water, just like safe, healthy, cool water? I am deeply committed to advocating for all, but also I understand that as a Black mother, I have additional responsibility to make sure to advocate for people who are underserved, marginalized, and overlooked. In my time at the University of Virginia during undergrad, one of my favorite mentors and favorite deans, his name is Dean Turner, he always shared the importance of having a seat at the table so that we could advocate for people who are often left out of decision making. And it's our responsibility to speak up for those who can't. Pediatricians, that is what we do. Dr. Jackie, that is our whole role, to advocate for little kids who cannot necessarily advocate for themselves. I remember several times vividly during residency where I was the only Black doctor on the team. I was the only resident who was a parent on the team, and I would have to bring up issues that were invisible to other members of my team. And I want to be clear, I don't think the invisibility of race and gender and class, I don't think it was malicious. I don't think anybody was intentionally not trying to discuss racial equity or class equity. I think it just didn't register with members of our team, but it still doesn't make it any less important, If anything, it makes it more important. So I remember in particular several times when I had to speak up about inequities and disparities in treatment. Many of us in medicine, many women of color in medicine, we learn early on to make sure we provide supporting evidence. We make sure that we are not emotional so that we are not labeled. But I remember a few cases in particular that happened when I was on the wards, and I had been reading, evidence that Child Protective Services and social work are called more on poor parents, more on Black parents. They're disproportionately called on single parents more than other families. And I witnessed firsthand several cases of medical neglect that were not being reported because the families just didn't fit the bill of needing to be referred. And I would bring it up on rounds. I would specifically share the research that, families such as this are not reported as frequently as, Black families or single parents. In general, folks were always, I think, very respectful and very honest and able to reflect and then able to do what we needed to do as mandated reporters so that we kind of balance things a little bit. So for me, these experiences have really provided me with a vantage point that others just unknowingly sometimes cannot see. And I think this is even more of a reason why we have to advocate for diversity in medicine. Our nation is very diverse at this point, and we really do have to reflect in the medical profession the demographics of our diverse nation. I think we owe it to our patients to reflect them based upon their sex and their gender, race, socioeconomic class. We know with the income inequality in this country, with regards to religion, you name it. I think we are all made better, and I think we do a better job of caring for our patients when we reflect that diversity. And so the last part of your question was just about talking about, being involved in my community. My family has a framed quote in our living room by an Aboriginal art collective. And it's one of the first things you see when you enter our house. And it says, "If you have come to help me, you are wasting your time. But if you have come because your liberation is bound up with mine, then come, let us work together." And I truly believe that my existence, my health, my well-being, I think it's intertwined with the health and the well-being of my partner, of my children, of my patients, my neighbors, my community in this world. And, similar to many scholars, including Marian Wright Edelman, service is the rent that we pay for living. And I think that holds true. I tell my friends and family all the time, like when they're texting me and asking me questions, they're like, "I'm so sorry. I don't mean to disturb you. My pediatrician's not awake." And I'm like, okay, well, come on over to my practice. I'm awake. But, I tell them if I did not spend all this time and all this money dedicating myself to becoming a phenomenal pediatrician, if I can't use that knowledge and those skills to help my family and friends. So it is my responsibility. It is my honor to use all the things in my head, as I tell my friends, all of this stuff in my head to help them. And the same goes for my community and my patients and my neighbors.
All right, so you're re-energizing my commitment to being a pediatrician. Because I think and I think you hit on some great points, and I got like goose pimples. Sometimes I like to I definitely listen to Oprah Winfrey, so I'm like and I'll jokingly say she refer to her like, oh, it's a tweetable moment. Oh, like I could just say like, oh, you had a whole bunch of tweetable moments. And I think it also speaks, what you're saying. Like, I'm like, okay, she's going to church. Is that I think kind of secretly, one of my wishes is that, especially, I've had so many, I've had a lot of Black professional women, either doctors, pediatricians, or psychologists, or educators. And my husband sometimes say like, "Oh, when are you gonna have some more men on?" And I will, but it's like I'm just so amazed at how many dynamic women of color, Black women, that I've had the opportunity to speak with. And it kind of like secretly, it's kind of like, well, I'm hoping that when parents, or if they listen to it with their young adults, that there's someone who sees that, oh, that's what pediatricians do. They're not just, we're not just, treating colds. That's one aspect, but we do so much more. And I think you speak to what more we can do, like it's social justice, it's health equity. I can go down the list, and I think you speak to that. And even the choice that you've made to have the type of pediatric practice that you do, I think also speaks to sort of, again, your agency, and again, affirming what you're saying about the fact that you want to, this is what I'm getting from it, right? You want to change that patient-doctor relationship, right? I think the way it is now, we do have some poor health outcomes, I think, because of the medical system that we have set up, right? The quote unquote the traditional medical system, and hopefully, your model will be a sort of a revolution and how we can think of different models for that patient-physician relationship.
Yeah. I mean, you speak to so many points, and all of these thoughts were going through my head when trying to figure out how to fit in a sustainable and authentic way in medicine. I just look around, and I just, me and my friends, I've got friends who are pharmacists and doctors. My husband's a professor, and these social justice conversations happen all the time. And so, you look around and I just say to myself, there is no good reason why one of the most scientifically advanced nations in the world, a nation that spends more of our gross domestic product than other nations, there's no reason why we cannot have the absolute best health outcomes, right? Unless we are doing something fundamentally wrong. I think health disparities are unethical. I think they are unjust. I think it is just wrong, right, to provide these different levels of care based upon what people can afford without providing just for everyone, just a basic level of service and access. I trained here in DC, and it was evident when I was in medical school even about the significant disparities of access. So if you're wealthy and you live in wealthier neighborhoods, let's say in DC, that would be like Upper Northwest, like Georgetown, right? There are numerous options for high-quality private practice medical care. But if you are not wealthy or you live in an underserved neighborhood, such as Southeast DC, you just don't have the same access to these high-quality private practices for all of these options. I experience it every day in my community. So part of house calls was going to where people were so that I wasn't locked into just being in a wealthy neighborhood where I could get the patients that could, afford the services. Direct primary care or concierge medicine is a way to provide, again, this high quality of care to patients, but you have to keep your overhead low. You can't have $6,000 or $7,000 rent, see patients, hire staff, and still have enough to have a sustainable and viable and thriving business. And so, DPC or direct primary care is a way to do that by keeping the overhead low. As I continue to grow and become more financially stable and my company becomes more sound, I do really hope to launch like a bartering system. There are a lot of people in DC who are doing like bartering so that folks, if they can't afford, financially the fees, if there are other services that they can provide, we can work together. And so that's part of having local medicine, keeping things small, keeping things in the community. And I know eventually, providing services for free to those in need who are not covered by health insurance and who are not covered, who just don't have enough money will also be a definite priority of mine. But today, my accountant will not let me do that. So that is in the future. But, all of these issues, social justice, equity, all of these are constantly in my mind and my heart when I'm making decisions. So, then they were definitely part of the impetus of establishing my practice.
So, Dr. J, can you share a little bit about your experience being a Black mother and pediatrician in Washington, D.C., where I grew up, by the way, so just shout out to D.C.
Yes, DC. As you know, it is a challenging and complex environment in DC, but one that I think is beautiful and also joyous. So I came to DC because I went to medical school here at the George Washington University, and I really fell in love with the region. I delivered my first son during my fourth year of medical school, and so I think, first of all, I started out as a Black woman in medical school, and I think we often feel marginalized, like our story isn't valued. I was always supported by the deans of my medical school and by the staff, and honestly, it was really the staff that really made me feel like I was at home. It was the janitors and the front desk people. They became like the second family to me. They would feed me when I was hungry and hadn't eaten because I was in the library all day, and they would also wake me up when I fell asleep in the library when I was supposed to be studying. So becoming a mother, I think for me, really made pediatrics real. It wasn't just about what I was reading in my books, what was very black and white, but it was really that additional level of empathy and understanding of what patients were going through. I know I would not be the pediatrician that I am today without being Black and being a mom. And health disparities, in that sense are very real. Like you can feel them because you see them and you live them every day in your daily life. I know in some of your previous episodes you've talked about, raising Black sons in the age of Trayvon Martin, and just the feeling you get when you hear those stories. I think it just brings some additional complexity and beauty to your practice. So, coming back to DC, we really wanted our boys to be exposed to, a wide range of Black folks, because our people are so diverse and we're not monolithic like, mainstream media would have us believe. DC, you've got the highly successful Black folks, to folks working for the city, to folks struggling for jobs, folks on public assistance. You've got people who are first generation from the Caribbean, people who are from the diaspora working for the embassies. And so DC really provides a really good microcosm of diversity, the world, gentrification, class issues, race issues, transportation issues. And so my experiences being Black and being a mom and pediatrician have just enabled me to take all of those diverse understandings and experiences and put them into making sure that I advocate for a broad range of families, advocate for all different families, because all of our issues, are shared, even though different communities may be experiencing things at disproportionate rates. I think it is a challenge, in 2019 to raise a family in a healthy way, in a successful way, in a holistic way. And so, definitely being a Black mom in DC has just provided, I think, a really good vantage point for being involved in kids' health in general.
So thank you very much for that perspective, and I totally agree. I think had I there was no other place I grew up, so I grew up in Washington, D.C. I had a Black pediatrician. Mm-hmm. My dad went to Howard University, and I was on Howard University's campus, just because doing projects, and then the Martin Luther King Library that was down there. So that shaped who I was. It's like for me, there was no glass ceiling. It was like, you want to be Black and be a professional, pick which one, right? And I think that really did make a difference for me growing up. But we talked a little bit about addressing health disparities. Mm-hmm. And I know we talked, more generally, but I was just wondering, what do you think, that additional role that you have being a pediatrician has played in helping to address, or overall addressing, health disparities that are affecting Black children and families?
Yeah, this is an issue that is really, really, really near and dear to my heart. I think as pediatricians, we must do more to not only speak about, but also to intervene in addressing health disparities. I'm very active and involved with the American Academy of Pediatrics, and I've attended, countless meetings and conference calls, where we review the alarming statistics. And the next step is always, let's do more research. Let's advocate with local politicians. And many of us, including myself, are just tired of these methods. And we're really getting to the point where we've seen in other fields where people are like, we have got to disrupt this business as usual. We have got to start developing and implementing small-scale programs that really address the needs of our community. It's very difficult, to have some of these big organizations, these big hospital systems, change course and do things, but individual providers can. Many providers such as myself, we're not relying on grant funding because that can be pretty fickle. These large healthcare systems are kind of stifled sometimes by the bureaucracy. Private practices, to open up a brick and mortar private practice, you have to get loans so that you can, outfit your center. But a lot of us are saying, like, we've already got enough school debt. We do not want to add on to this. So I think by providing care on a smaller scale with smaller practices, with local practices, I think many of us are really saying we have to change healthcare, and it is okay to do that one home at a time. Like it is okay and it is valid. I think pediatricians also really have to do a lot to practice in sustainable and authentic ways. As I shared earlier, one of the areas of advocacy for me is advocating for our patients, but it's also advocating for ourselves and our well-being. I think we have got to stop blaming everything on our bosses bosses. Oh, my boss is evil. Oh, my hospital administrators want me to see more patients. Oh, these darn insurance companies, they're just ruining my life. Well, yeah, we have all of those constraints, but we have a lot of skills and tools that we can use to find ways to meet our patients where they are with the services that they deserve. And so I think we have a moral obligation to really practice at the top of our abilities and not just what fits in these constraints that are imposed upon us by outside forces. I think the patients deserve it, and also just as important, I think we as providers deserve it. And I think we, have some of the best and brightest minds, as you hear people say all the time. If we put our heads together, we take folks with backgrounds in medicine and public health, folks with business, degrees. I have, friends who work in nonprofit sectors, folks who work for for-profit companies, community accounts. Like if we all pull our resources and our experience and our skills together, I think we can really, transform and revolutionize what is happening. And I think, again, it is a moral imperative because I do not want to look back 10 years from now and see that these health disparities that we have become even worse. Because unfortunately, I think if we continue to do what we're doing, kids are getting sicker and sicker, people are getting sicker and sicker, providers are leaving medicine left and right. So we have to come up with innovative, small local solutions that then can be seeds for change elsewhere. So I think that we have got to stop the talking. I think the talking is good. I think the research is good, but also let's figure it out and let's solve it together. So, I thank you so much for this podcast where you're highlighting so many of the things that need to be shared. And I just thank you for the opportunity to be able to talk about these things that are very near and dear to, both of our hearts.
Oh, it's a pleasure to talk with you and to hear, such passion, the passion that you have, because I think, again, I mentioned this before, I think for me, being a pediatrician like you are as well, is beyond what we think it might be. And you provide such a great example of the power that an individual has, despite, yes, it takes a lot of years of school to be a pediatrician, but I think the power, if it's used correctly and used, for a force of good, and that's what you're doing, I think it's inspiring, and hopefully, there'll be other young people who aspire to do it, and even us as adults too, right? We can do things differently. Like you said, I think there are opportunities to do it because I think we have to, right? We don't have the same outcome, then we do the same thing. If we want a different outcome, then we've got to do things differently.
We have to.
This has been, again, a great conversation.
Yes, thank you so much for having me. I really, again, I look forward to future conversations and collaboration with you. And thank you again for this podcast that is just highlighting some very, very important and timely topics.
Thank you for listening to this episode of What is Black Podcast. You can listen to us on Google Podcasts, Stitcher, Spotify, and Apple Podcasts. And we're also on social media, so we'd love to hear from you. We're on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. So until next time,